What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. Today we're actually bringing you the first of two remastered Skyrim builds that are coming this week. You'll get the one you voted in on Saturday, so kick back and relax because we're bringing you double the builds. This is one of our favorite looking builds we've ever made, and it is the Bounty Hunter. Like our other remastered builds, he will be enhanced when it comes to gear, statistics, perks, and playstyle decisions, and he has one of the best backstories of all time, which we've made even better. Now before we begin the build, I want to tell you that Gameloft have in fact been kind enough to sponsor this Skyrim video, which is very exciting for us and our subscribers. This sponsorship is for the mobile game Dungeon Hunter 5, in which you actually get to play as a bounty hunter. It's also an amazing looking fantasy adventure, and while it may not be for consoles, it has very impressive graphics for a mobile game. But more importantly than that, the gameplay and features itself are where this game shines brightest. Like Skyrim, you'll be able to embark upon an epic single player storyline, and as you'd expect, there's many dungeons for you to hack and slash your way through, and even 5 different realms to explore. There's also an awesome amount of aesthetic options available for your character's gear, and if you've been watching our channel for long enough, you'll know we are huge fans of that. Being able to play it with your friends is another benefit available through multiplayer, making it a perfect way to enjoy playing a fun fantasy game this holidays when you're not within hand's reach of your keyboard or controller, but still want to enjoy being a bounty hunter. Click the link in the description and download Dungeon Hunter 5 now for free if you want to test out the fast-paced action for yourself and continue slaughtering massive creatures and collecting loot from anywhere you can take your phone. It's available on iOS, Android, and even Windows for those who want to play it on the big screen. With all that said and done, let's get hyped and nostalgic for the first Skyrim build coming this week and start delving into the life of the Bounty Hunter. The Bounty Hunter is a Dunmer, and as a result, he will have a 50% resistance to fire. This is very useful against dragons and mages. As a bounty hunter, he's often exploring lots of dungeons to take down powerful bandit leaders, so this is even more useful against any fire-based traps that are found here. He'll also have his Ancestor's Wrath ability, allowing him to use what is essentially a flame cloak once per day, which does 8 points of fire damage per second to others around him. This is useful early on, but in later stages of the game, it's not the most powerful thing. Then again, if you're in a powerful battle, why not? Just make sure you don't accidentally damage someone who you previously pacified, as they will become enraged and start fighting you again. In terms of a standing stone, the Bounty Hunter will be using the Atronach stone as the endgame standing stone and the Lover stone early on. The Lover stone is perfect for builds early on who have a mixed set of skills, as it causes all skills to level 15% faster, as opposed to just one certain classification of skills like you have with the Mage Stone, Warrior Stone, and Thief Stone. The Atronach stone is our favorite choice now for endgame characters, as it's just so good, even more so for this build as he uses magic. What this stone does is give you 50 more points of magicka, it gives you 50% less magicka regen, but then grants you 50% more spell absorption. This gives you a 50% chance of negating all the damage from an incoming spell and absorbing it into your own magicka pool. 50 more points of magicka will obviously help with all our casting, and the lowered magicka regen is actually so insignificant, even though it sounds hefty. For the stat spread, the Bounty Hunter will have 60% health and 40% magicka. He doesn't exactly have a high armor rating, so 60% health will help keep him sturdy. You'll want to avoid being hit and therefore losing health by pacifying foes anyway, which brings us to magicka. 40% is useful for all the illusion spells we're casting, and of course for summoning our bound sword. We will be using enchanting for this build, which is a new skill we've picked up, meaning that we'll be reducing casting cost, but obviously there's a lot of time before you reach this stage, in which case 40% magicka will be very useful. If you really want, you could go 10% stamina for extra power attacks and only use 30% magicka allocation, but the build won't be as user-friendly early on, so we don't recommend this for everyone. Born in Hammerfell, the Bounty Hunter grew up with his uncle and no parents in the town of Belkarth, a trading town on the eastern side of the province, notorious for attracting scoundrels and wanderers. Even though the town was filled with Redguard architecture, it was quite a multicultural area, so as a dark elf, the Bounty Hunter never really stood out as so different to the rest. Living with his uncle named Ervil was basically his whole life. Ervil never told him what happened to his parents, and it was off limits for discussion. Part of him felt crushed that he would never know, but he loved his uncle nonetheless. As he grew older, he came to realize that it was probably for his own good, as their fate was likely something awful. He could remember a few moments as a young child when there were 3 adults around to care for him, but apart from these faint blurs, it was just the one man and him. Uncle Ervil once traveled throughout Tamriel as an adventurer when he was younger, and earned a living on his way performing illusion magic as a magician. He had decided to stay in Hammerfell to settle down as he grew older, and Ervil liked it here, as it reminded him of Morrowind in some ways, even though in other ways it was very different, and to him, a fresh environment. he had invited the parents of the bounty hunter to live here too, hence the birthplace of this character build. They were able to give Ervil quite a lot of financial support, but after they disappeared from the bounty hunter's life, Ervil was left to take care of him and didn't have enough coin to do so. He may have loved Hammerfell, but Hammerfell didn't really like him, at least in the sense that the locals frowned upon magic and therefore he couldn't perform his shows. He taught the bounty hunter some basic illusion magic spells as he was growing up, but this was done behind closed doors. Ervil treated the bounty hunter as well as he could, although they didn't exactly live the best life, as you'd expect. The uncle struggled to make ends meet, and while in theory he could just go to another province and perform magic there, he didn't have the coin to afford the travel and was getting a bit old anyway. It could be dangerous for the bounty hunter when he was a youngling too, so they just stayed and lived in Belkarth. As the bounty hunter aged, he saw his uncle find himself in many dire circumstances, but together they pushed through it, with the bounty hunter taking basic jobs for basic pay as soon as he could. He would clean the local inn floors, he would deliver goods to merchants nearby, literally any simple work he could get his hands on. Eventually, however, there became a time where there was little work that could be done by the two Dark Elves, and the uncle's desperation caused him to make some bad decisions. He fell in with the wrong crowd, the type of crowd who like to have fun but will enforce punishment if you break the rules. Ervil was throwing money into an underground gambling club, which consisted of regulars who ran the operation, but also consistently changed participants as new people traveled to and from the town, trading their goods and risking some of their money in the hope of getting twice as much back. Ervil started joining in very often, endangering the small amount of money he had for himself and the bounty hunter in various games. One would expect that Ervil would be broke in no time, but this was no ordinary gambler. Ervil had been practicing his illusion magic at home more and more, and combined with his previous experience as a magician, he was able to use his skills in secret as an advantage. Illusion magic allowed him to sway the games they would all play in his favor. He would force people to make hasty and rushed decisions, and other times he subtly made them a bit more passive, allowing them to sit back and play it safe when they should be risking more. His tricks weren't foolproof, but they sent his chances of winning skyrocketing, and most of the time he was taking home large sums of winnings. More and more gold which could be used to give him and the bounty hunter a better life. The bounty hunter wasn't aware of any of this, although found it highly suspicious that his uncle had so much income for them to use all of a sudden. He wasn't exactly complaining though, and he had trust in his uncle that he would be doing the right thing for both of them. This went on for longer than you'd think, allowing Ervil to become one of the richest inhabitants of the town. Many of the criminals who ran the underground club suspected him of cheating, but they simply couldn't see how he was doing it, and they were actually making lots of money from the people who visited to see the man who hardly ever lost. They didn't really care who the money was going to because they were making more money off other losers anyway. Finally, however, the uncle got too cocky, and one day when he used an illusion spell, it was far too obvious. He was caught by the gamekeeper who would watch over the events, and the criminals went wild. By this stage, even more time had passed, and the club was very gradually losing popularity as the odds were seen as so unfair. Like dogs finally let out of a cage, the regular gamblers jumped on Ervil and drove him into the ground. Ervil let loose a pacify spell on one who'd drawn a dagger, but found his arms ripped to either side of him by two other brutes. The gamekeeper who had caught him walked over. He was almost 7 feet tall, and to Ervil he appeared as wide as a carriage. He was dressed in steel armor, and it was his job not only to make sure no one was cheating, but also to make sure that whoever was doing the wrong thing got what they deserved. He carried a massive halberd and walked over to Ervil with a menacing grin. Completely helpless, the bounty hunter's uncle squirmed on the ground, pleading for mercy, claiming he would give all his winnings back plus more, but his requests were ignored. The gamekeeper raised his weapon to his side and swung it in a downward curve to the floor. Being armed with a halberd indoors was mainly for intimidation factor, but even in the relatively enclosed space, he easily generated enough force to chop Ervil's legs right off. He screamed in pain and found himself passing out as the other criminals took out their knives and began stabbing him furiously. A crafty individual stood in the corner watching calmly. He didn't want to voice any protest and end up like the pile of gore and limbs on the floor. He knew who Ervil was though, and knew of his relation to the bounty hunter. He took it upon himself to inform the bounty hunter of what had happened. After hearing the news, he was devastated, but more than this, he was furious. He couldn't believe his uncle would put himself in a situation like that, a situation that risked his own life and by association the life of the bounty hunter. He still loved his uncle and felt deeply about the loss. He knew that his his uncle had done the wrong thing, but his emotions overwhelmed his logic, and he decided to seek out the criminals at the underground gambling location. He walked in during one of their games, clenching a high-quality sword he took from his home, one that his uncle had bought with all the new money. A few criminals looked over and saw him walk in and alerted the gamekeeper immediately. The bounty hunter was here to kill, and while he was in an intense emotional state, he still knew he had to use more than his blade to avenge his uncle. Sensing his intentions, the gamekeeper picked up his halberd, but before he could get close, the bounty hunter whipped out a fury spell and sent the steel-clad juggernaut into a manic state of bloodlust. The bounty hunter ran to the other side of the room and began to slash apart the criminals who hadn't even had a chance to pull out their favorite knives. His adrenaline made him strong, and his fear of death spurred him on greatly, making him reach a state of invincible confidence that led him to perform far greater than anyone expected. This beefy dark elf was the least of their problems though, because the gamekeeper was on a killing spree, skewering and decapitating the inhabitants around the gambling table. The bounty hunter kept the fury spells coming, causing many other criminals far away to fight to the death with nothing but their bare hands. He made sure to aim these spells away from him, as an enraged target near him was very dangerous. The room was pretty small though, and even after everyone lay dead, he was pretty close to the gamekeeper now, who had selected him as his last target. The bounty hunter was weak, and he knew he would be defeated unless he changed up his tactics. He felt drained, and with his last source of remaining energy, he casted a pacify spell at the steel warrior approaching him. Sadly for the bounty hunter, this spell was not strong enough. It did calm down the target slightly, but it didn't make him anywhere close to peaceful. The gamekeeper charged at the bounty hunter, however felt his vision turn sideways as he tripped over, with the man who had informed the bounty hunter of what had happened tackling the aggressor from the side. The gamekeeper was exhausted and lost his weapon as he lost his footing. The bounty hunter walked over with the sword and thrust it through the face of the gargantuan henchman. He had used his magic, brains, and rage to kill them all. The man who told the bounty hunter about what the criminals did to the uncle had a plan of his own, and after pulling himself from the ground and looking around at the bounty hunter and the corpses, he told him that the criminals had a bounty on their heads, and that they should collect it together. The bounty hunter, still shaking and confused, agreed. He was all alone now and needed some coin. His uncle's gold would likely be confiscated soon. He left the scene, now unworried about getting in trouble, as he had technically done what was needed in the town. He was able to collect the bounties after all, and he decided to split it with the man, as he wouldn't have known about it otherwise, and he did sort of save his life. The bounty hunter collected the gold from the local authorities, and to his surprise, he was paid incredibly well. He sat down on the side of the main street with the big bag of coins in his hands for hours, just thinking. He wasn't sure exactly what he would do with himself, but decided that perhaps being a bounty hunter would be a good way to make a living, and even though he had to risk his life, he didn't care because he didn't have that much to live for anymore anyway. As one would imagine, he was still pretty upset and had lost hope with life. Wanting a fresh start, he decided to head somewhere that was nothing like Hammerfell. He'd always wanted to see other lands and therefore headed to Skyrim, a place that was so different, where there was lots of violence and lots of work for people like bounty hunters. Packing some of his uncle's gear, he left the town and his old life behind, until he was captured on the border and carted to Helgen, where he later escaped. Over time, he will develop a passion for building his talents that assist him in his profession, and he will also find meaning through forming new bonds with members of various factions in the land. When it comes to role-playing this build, you will be out to make a living through bounty hunting, but you'll also be selling a lot of loot that you gather in the process. Money is important to this character, as he never wants to be poor again, though he considers himself a good person and won't ever break his moral code for more septums. His moral code, though, basically involves the sins of his targets, meaning that he won't kill innocent people for money and won't take part in work for assassin organizations or individuals. He's also a big believer in law and order, so he actually won't have a problem with killing people who have done wrong by a city and its people. That said, if these people haven't done too much wrong and have only committed petty crimes, he will feel sorry for them, though he still knows what his uncle did was wrong. He also won't steal if he doesn't have to. Because of this, you'll end up killing people who have done bad things and creatures that are causing trouble. He has no problem killing creatures at all. Jarls will put bounties on dragons and bandits, so ask their steward for work and get bounty hunting. You can also go to innkeepers and pick up some bounty hunting contracts which have been dropped off by the guards. Radiant quests are also a good way of bounty hunting. Killing vampires on the side for more coin from the Dawn Guard works well, and the companions have heaps of contracts you can fulfill, which is similar to bounties too. They will pay you to kill beasts, hunt down escaped criminals, assassinate leaders of the Silverhand faction, and even rescue a kidnapped citizen. Obviously, search for any side quests which work like a bounty hunter's job too. Don't be afraid to do other work for coin when you need it as well. A bounty hunter's skill set is useful to many of the inhabitants in Skyrim. Looking at factions, the bounty hunter should definitely join the the Companions Guild for the quests I mentioned, and definitely the College of Winterhold, as he will want to further his magic ability and discover how to best use it effectively in his chosen line of work. You should do the main storyline and, like I said, do the Dawnguard DLC, siding with the Dawnguard. You'll also want to complete the Dragonborn DLC for more adventures, searching for new bounties and work to be done. Now, in terms of the companions, whether or not you want to stay a werewolf or stay mortal is completely up to you. Now let's go over the skills, spells, perks, and playstyle. The skills for the bounty hunter are one-handed, illusion, light armor, conjuration, and now also enchanting and speech. Any person brave enough to pursue a living which involves fighting with people to the death needs to be pretty good at fighting. One-handed will be used by the bounty hunter to develop his sword mastery and ensure victory as he gradually gets better and better at stabbing, parrying, and slashing his enemies apart. The light armor skill will simply be used just so we can increase our armor rating as we are wearing light armor, and this will help us stay alive as we'll take less damage. Obviously, as a bounty hunter, there are some battles you can't win with armor and a sword alone. This is where illusion comes in, allowing you to pacify enemies while you focus on killing others before finally coming back for them. Illusion will also let you make enemies fight each other, meaning that you'll have more manpower to collect your bounties with, even though the victims won't realize they're actually helping you. Conjuration is used for the sole reason of summoning your sword, and enchanting exists so that we can deal more damage with the sword and also reduce our casting costs for all the spells. Every successful bounty hunter has a competitive edge in the business, and besides the edge of his sword, this bounty hunter has enchanting to really give his apparel some arcane advantages. Lockpicking is another skill he needs, as he wants to be able to access absolutely anywhere his target may be hiding. Being stopped from succeeding due to a locked door is never fun, and with our perks we'll also be finding more gold while traversing Skyrim, especially in dungeons that have lots of chests. Finally, speech has also been added so that the bounty hunter can earn even more money by selling loot that he gathers on his bounty hunting journeys. He will develop quite the silver tongue, and over time comes to realize that a bounty hunter will earn twice as much if they develop their ability to sell the loot they pick up while on the job. He can also use speech to persuade and intimidate people, giving him another way of getting his way without having to always resort to bloodshed. Another competitive advantage the bounty hunter has role-playing wise is looking innocent. No one suspects him of causing harm, as he literally doesn't have a weapon on him until he proceeds to summon a sword and let loose some magic. When it comes to spells, the bounty hunter has a neat, simple list. On this list is Bound Sword and every illusion spell that affects the behavior of other people. Bound Sword is used to summon your sword, and the illusion spells are used to manipulate the battlefield for ultimate crowd control. Pacify will be the main spell being used, as it will stop enemies from attacking you and calm them down. Do note that at later levels you will always need to be dual wielding these illusion spells so you can affect the highest level enemies. Frenzy will also be used to make enemies fight each other, but just remember that these enemies can also choose to attack you, so give them space and make sure they're near a target you also want dead. Fierce spells can also be used if you so please. Now let's talk perks. We have a lot of skills, but not every skill is maxed out with perks. They're spread more thinly, and this is actually the most effective setup for this build. In one hand, we're getting all the Armsman perks for double damage with our sword, and then we're getting Fighting Stance and Savage Strike. Fighting Stance will make your power attacks cost 20% less stamina, and Savage Strike will make standing power attacks do 25% more damage and have a chance of decapitating enemies. We find the other one-handed perks just aren't worth it for this build. Weapon specialization perks are never worth it, based on the fact that they work from base damage. The Bound Sword can't be smithed up though, but its damage will obviously be way above base damage due to Armsman and simply by leveling our one-handed skill. We're also increasing its damage with Enchanting. Enchanting will be used by this build to cover our apparel in beneficial effects. This means adding effects to make our sword do more damage, making us take less damage, and making our spells cost less. We'll be getting the perks in the middle branch all the way up to extra effect, meaning that the magnitude of the enchantments I recommend in the gear section will be increased, and we'll be able to put 2 effects on one item. From light armor, the bounty hunter will simply get all 5 ranks of agile defender to double his armor rating. Conjuration is another skill where little investment is needed. We simply get the novice conjuration perk to make bound sword cost half as much to cast, and then we get mystic binding so that bound weapons do more damage. We didn't think that soul stealer was worth getting, as we have no enchanted weapons which require recharging. When it comes to the illusion tree, we're getting every single perk except for master illusion and quiet casting. This will allow us to reduce casting cost and use all kinds of illusion spells against higher level enemies, especially when we're dual casting. Through the use of the Master of the Mind perk, this includes Daedra, automatons, and undead among the standard creatures and humanoid enemies of Skyrim. We don't need master spells as dual-wielding expert spells is superior, and we don't need quiet casting as we don't use stealth. When it comes to lockpicking, we go up from novice all the way to expert lockpicking. This makes locks that are expert difficulty and below easier to unlock, and the reason we don't get the master level perk is due to the fact that we get unbreakable. This perk means that our lockpicks won't ever break, so you'll only ever need one, and therefore there's no need for the master lockpicking perk. Lockpicking will be very easy at this point anyway, especially with the locksmith perk, which makes your lockpick start closer to the opening position when you first engage a lock. The golden touch perk is also chosen so we find more gold in chests while we're bounty hunting through loot heavy areas, and the treasure hunter perk will help even more with this, giving the bounty hunter a 50% higher chance of finding special treasure, aka better loot. Finally, we have the speech skill tree. Here we get all 5 ranks of the haggling perk to make prices twice as good, and then we go all the way up through the left branch till the end. This will give you better prices with the opposite sex, let you sell any type of item to any merchant, sell stolen goods, and be able to invest 500 septims in a store to make them have more gold available for future selling. With the master trader perk, all merchants will also just have 1000 more septims available for bartering. The playstyle for the bounty hunter involves careful placement of illusion spells before using your bound sword to decimate your foes. There's 2 ways to look at a battle situation. The first way is using magic heavily because you're severely outnumbered. In these circumstances, you'll want to do things like dual wield pacify and start spraying it at the most troublesome enemies first. People like archers who are going to be shooting you while you try to deal with melee attacks. After dealing with these people, then switch to your sword and take out the key players who haven't been pacified. Obviously, if you can just pacify everyone, then do that, but that's not always possible due to magical limitations. Also, you may want to use frenzy instead on targets like the archers I mentioned, so they start shooting everyone and drawing attention away from you. Remember to dual wield spells against higher level enemies. Alternatively, what you can do in the other type of situation, which is simply a more modest battle against one or a few attackers, is have bound sword in one hand and pacify in the other. Simply cast bound sword as you start shooting off a pacify spell or two, and then proceed to kill the non-pacified enemies. Then the pacified onlookers can be slaughtered easily after with well-aimed power attacks. Remember to do all the radiant quests I mentioned when talking about factions and role-playing for lots of coin, and don't forget to loot as you go. Now let's get into gear. Due to the fact that our weapon is technically from a spell and we've already covered spells, this section will just be about apparel. This bounty hunter wears scaled horn armor, scaled boots, and scaled gauntlets with a temple priest hood. Scaled horn armor will start appearing when you reach about level 19 or 20, and until this, just wear whatever light armor looks the most similar. To get the hood, you'll actually need to head to Raven Rock, which is on Solstheim. You'll have to go to the temple and kill one of the priests inside to get it, meaning you're going to want to rationalize the situation for role-playing purposes. We recommend role-playing that the priest did something horrible, like cover up the murder of a child, and as a result, someone put a bounty on his head and you collected it, but then the job giver fled before paying up. You'll also want to wear your desired ring and necklace for more enchanting slots, and speaking of which, you'll want to be enchanting all of your gear. Obviously, you can't enchant the bound sword though. You want to enchant all of your jewelry, armor, and the hood with things like Fortify One-Handed and Fortify Illusion. Fortify Illusion will make all your illusion spells cost hardly anything to cast once you're at the higher levels of enchanting, meaning you'll never be sure on your ability to stop enemies dead in their tracks. Whether you're calming them down or turning them on their allies is up to you. Fortify One-Handed is one of the most important enchantments for the bounty hunter, as it will make his bound sword do more damage, which is very beneficial considering it cannot be enchanted itself and it cannot be improved via smithing. Other enchantment ideas include increasing your magic resistance and also Fortify Conjuration. You may think that reducing the cost of summoning your sword isn't that useful, but if you want to switch to dual casting illusion spells and then switch back to slashing and then switch back to dual casting illusion spells, it's very helpful to have your bound sword spell basically cost nothing. At the end of the day though, you can enchant however you see fit. And that concludes the first of 2 Skyrim builds coming this week. Another huge thank you to Gameloft for sponsoring this video. We're super happy about it and we hope everyone has enjoyed being able to get 2 Skyrim builds this week. The link to download Dungeon Hunter 5 is in the description below. Subscribe for more Skyrim builds like this, and remember to like the video if you enjoyed it and share it on social media to show your friends. Speaking of which, our social media links are also in the description. My name is Michael, thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.